안녕하세요. Good afternoon in Korean time. Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased today to have a valuable opportunity meeting you to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the diplomatic relation between Republic of Korea and United Arab Emirates. Today's topic is a very interesting and cultural issue entitled the 1,200 years long historical encounter between Korea and Arab Emirates and future cooperation and prospect. In reviewing modern history in Korea, Islam as a new religion with a unique value system and Arab image widely became known to Koreans in 1970s. But the relation between Korea and Arab have historical depths without any hostility and colonial memory. In this sense, to prepare new era for Korea-UAE cooperation, I'd like to emphasize two valuable assets. As the first asset, we have more than 1 million Koreans who had advanced to the construction market in the Arab countries in the 1970s and 80s, with oil boom, of course. The fact that Korea has a huge number of citizens who had experience in the various corners of Arab countries should not be underestimated, because it became a vital opportunity for Koreans to touch wide range of the first-hand information on Arab and Islamic culture. At the same time, the Korean laborers with hard-working and well-organized team spirit did a great contribution to the transformation and development of Arab society, including United Arab Emirates, and to rapid economic growth in Korea as well, through their money remittance, which enabled Korea to reach the level of US 10 billion export volume with US 1,000 GDP per capita. I strongly believe that Arab peoples love Korea today, and preparing Korea brand is not suddenly emerged trend or temporary cultural tendency. It has a deep-rooted background since 1970s. So it is a very time to evaluate mutual relations of last 50 years as the unique privilege to the future 100 years cooperation. Moreover, it is necessary to connect contemporary Hallyu Korean wave of popularity to positive image on Korea, which has been deeply carved in the heart of Arab peoples since 1970s. The second important asset is the long and friendly historical relation between two cultural regions since the 8th century. Contrary to the commonly held belief, the history of Korea-Arab relations have more than 1,200 years. We can find a lot of vivid artifacts to show the commercial and political relation between Korea and Arab world. With the advent of Islam, of course, Arab Muslim merchants should continue their business with Korea. I'd like to raise some interesting questions to you. The frankincense produced in the Arabian Peninsula was widely used in the 7th and 8th century among aristocrats of Silla Kingdom and in the Buddhist temples. Is it not surprising that many Arab Muslims came to Korean Peninsula for business and residence since the 8th century. Could you believe that there was a big mosque in the capital city of Korea Kingdom in the 13th century? Is it true? The modern Korean traditional lunar calendar system and new invention of scientific instrument of the 15th century have been directly influenced by Islamic science and technology. Can you imagine that a Muslim sheikh in the 15th century in Korean palace recited some verses of Holy Quran in front of a Korean king for his longevity and national prosperity? All the facts are true, and we can find many reliable documents from Korean or Islamic sources. Therefore, Islamic culture has been very familiar to Korean peoples even since the 8th or 9th century. Now we'll see the more detail, the documents between Korean and Arab world. Long before the advent of Islam, Korea and the Arab world were trading by such overland routes as the Silk Road. Documented references are few and far between, but sufficient remain to give proof of substantial commerce between Korea and Arab world through land and sea route. This is an express way connecting from Constantinople to Korea. The older traders starting from Constantinople and through Baghdad of Abbasid Caliphate, and then via Bukhara and Samarkand and Central Asian city, then finally reached to Xi'an of Tang, China. From China, some vivid commercial traders advanced the Korean peninsula, the Gyeongju of the Korean kingdom. This is a main trading route connecting from Constantinople to Korean peninsula. Even the sea route, starting from the Gulf area, also Arab Emirate, Dubai, and Muscat in Oman, it navigated to the western part of India and Sri Lanka through Malacca and Indochina and reached to Gwangju, is the opposite side of Hong Kong modern times. And from Hangzhou, some adventurous traders is reached to Korean peninsula since the 7th centuries. This is Hangzhou and Yangzhou, very important, the entry port to advance the Korean peninsula. It takes only 10 days to reach the western part point of the Korean peninsula, then reach to Gyeongju, the capital of the Korean kingdom. It takes less than 3 weeks. Of course, we have many the archaeological examples. One sample is the glass cups excavated from ancient tombs in Gyeongju, the capital of Silla Kingdom. Most of glass cups were either from Arab world, the mostly Eastern Mediterranean, or the Levant under Roman territories in the 5th or 6th century. We can see some samples, how beautifully designed, the aesthetically colorful, the shape. There's old glass cups excavated from royal tombs of Korean kingdom, 5th and 6th century, 1,500 years ago. It is a vivid evidence how closely connected the Arab world to Korean peninsula. In the pre-Islamic era, in the field of music, art, literature, and other related disciplines, mostly Middle Eastern motif came to Korea. Even in Korean chronicles, we can find some interesting and important description. The most important thing is the Samguk-sagi, the official chronicle of three kingdoms, has a detailed account of commercial items which were mainly transacted by Arab Muslim merchants and widely used in Korean society. Carpet was one of the important items. Can you believe? The carpet was daily used among aristocrats of Silla kingdom. This is a Buddhist temple of Korean society. You can find any place this kind of design. We call dancheong, Korean name. But it's dancheong in Buddhist temple directly influenced by Arabesque design from Arab countries. Arabesque became the most popular Korean traditional design arts in Buddhism. Even the Korean Buddhism was closely related culturally with the Middle Eastern and Arab world. This is some clay busts and figures that excavated from the tombs. These clay busts and figures representing Muslim merchants. Do you agree with me? This looks like Muslims. Yes. This figuration 9th century stone statues we call the military guard of the royal tomb. We call Wonsung Wangnung, represent the Muslim figuration. According to the Korean scholars, absolute majority agree this stone statues the influence for Muslim figuration. More detailed description. You can see the cap here. The backside looks like the ribbon, turban with a ribbon. This is not traditional Korean figure and cultural representation. Must be from Muslim, the cultural background. The third, even we can find a lot of Arab sources showing Muslim settlement in Korea. With advent of Islam from 7th and 8th century, the direct contact between Muslims and Koreans can be borne out by references to Korea, found many Muslim sources written by such Muslim scholars as you know well, Ibn Khurdabi, Suleiman al-Tajir, Masudi, etc. The oldest extant record and first remark on Korea is the famous book Kitab al-Masalik wal-Mamalik, the book on Road and Kingdom by Ibn Khurdabi. It mentioned the settlement of Muslims on Korean peninsula. Most of Arabic manuscripts describe the Silla as an utopia and paradise of the forest. This is very interesting. Still, you like Korea very much. Hallyu's very popularity is based on ancient description. The old Arabic manuscript described the Silla as utopia and paradise. Even 12th century, very famous World Map of Idris. In his map, of course, Idris, outstanding Muslim geographer of the medieval age, completed the geographical books in the middle of the 12th century. In the book, in the map, he designed most accurate world map in medieval age and described the Silla consisting of 6 islands. I will show the map. This is Al-Idris world map. This is Asin, this is China, this is Al-Hindi, this is India. You can read it. Al-Silla, 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 Al-Silla. This I cannot read, but it's most of scholars identify this island also Al-Silla. The Al-Idris world map described Korea as a 6th island. It means they came to Korean peninsula through sea route starting from Hangzhou or southeastern port of China. This is the first world map described Korea by Arab geographers. Even beside of the world map, you know the very familiar names, Masudi, Yaqubi, Ibn Khordadbi, and Ibn Rusta, Ibn al-Nadim, and Abul Fida, Ibn al-Bakwi, Sulaiman al-Tajir, Masudi, al-Idrisi, Zakaria Ghazwini, Ibn Said, Shamsuddin Dimashqi, Ahmad al-Nuwairi, Ibn Khaldun, al-Makrizi, Ahmed Majid al-Najid, Masudi, Ibn Battuta, al-Maqdisi, Nuruddin al-Awfi, Abul Fida, so on and so on. So many Arab historians and geographers mentioned Silla and beautiful city and with excellent environment. This is my study during last 20 years to find the Arabic sources in which we can find many reliable information about Korean Peninsula. Now we'll see how about the Korean sources? We can find any description about Arabs or Muslims is coming to Korea? Yes, we have. The first Korean sources on Muslims in Korea is the Goryeo-sa, official chronicles of Goryeo dynasty, saying this: in September 2024, Al-Laji and 100 people from Tashi country, it means Arabia, came and presented their native products to king. The commercial merchandise was as follows: mercury, hamburger, myrrh, sapanut, and etc. They mentioned important trading items in Korean official chronicles. You see, nowadays, all the Europeans, world peoples, even Arab peoples, they call Korea, the country named Korea. From when? From whom? We call Hanguk, 대한민국. Korean peoples don't say Korea, we call Hanguk, 대한민국. But it's the old English name, European Arabic name is Korea. That's very interesting. Muslims came to Korea during the Goryeo dynasty. Then Muslims introduced Korea as Korea to Europeans. So Europeans now call Hanguk as Korea. Muslims in the time of Goryeo dynasty formed their community where they could preserve full religious identity, maintained their Islamic way of life. These are very interesting stories. Furthermore, they built a mosque called the Yegung. It's a ceremonial palace. The Muslim leaders of Doro is a kind of sheikh were chosen to perform act of worship in accordance with Islamic law Sharia. By these Muslims, the country named Korea became widely known to Arab and then Europe and then the world rest. The modern country named Korea is happened by the Muslims in Goryeo dynasty. I found one tombstone. It's a copy of tombstone. In the 14th century tombstone discovered in Guangzhou in China. You can read Arabic. Very interestingly, in the tombstone is attached to the one Korean person named Ramadan. He came to China for business and then died in China, so he buried in a Muslim cemetery. So his tombstone is still alive in the Guangzhou, the municipal museum in China. This is very accurately described in the tombstones is one Muslim from Korea is described in the tombstone. So now it's very clear, many Muslim community in the 13th, 14th century. So do we have any cultural confluence between Korea and Muslim world? Yes, we have. During the medieval era, the great number of Muslims advanced to Korea. Through Silk Road, high level of Islamic culture was introduced into Korea. Korea was benefited to a great extent by Islamic astronomy, medicine, calendar science, architecture, weaponry, and literature and art. Now we should design new Renaissance map focusing on Asian Renaissance. In the 10th century, in Baghdad, in Abbasid period, we call the Arab Renaissance, was the top level of science and technology and art and academician. 500 years before the European Renaissance. Then Islamic culture through Andalusia, particularly Cordoba and Toledo, it advanced to the Roma and Firenze. They the blossom in the 16th European Renaissance. Then Central Asian Renaissance in 14th century during the time of Timurid. Through Yuan and Ming dynasty, the new technology and Islamic cultural background came to Korean Peninsula, and early 15th century Joseon during the King Sejong, we have the Korean Renaissance. It directly connected to Abbasid Islamic Renaissance of Baghdad. Then in Mughal Renaissance we call. So we more emphasized on Asian Renaissance much earlier than European Renaissance. This is my idea. Another interesting stories in the Korean chronicles, the Muslim ulamas from time to time was officially invited to the official cut ceremony where they practice their own religious ritual such as a Quran recitation and Arabic dua to pray for king's longevity and prosperity of the country. Can you believe it? 15th centuries, the Muslim representative in Korea officially invited to the palace in front of king. They recited the Holy Quran and pray for Arabic dua for the national prosperity and king's health and longevity. We have very clear indication and written document of Joseon Wangjo Silok, official Korean chronicles. But what happened? The old Muslims, why, when, how disappeared? Not continued to the modern Muslim community in 1950s. For 500 years, what happened? Where they went, disappeared. They showed the evidence. The year 1427, King Sejong announced royal decree to prohibit any kind of foreign religion, foreign ritual, and foreign customs. So, Islamic religious freedom was faced by the serious threats posed by issue of Royal Decree 1427. The decree prohibited all the Islamic way of life. Finally, they were compelled to assimilate Korean society through marriage, and no more record could be found till 1920s. Now we see the modern Muslim community. Modern Muslim community in Korea appeared in 1955 by Turkish Muslim soldiers who had participated in the Korean War. The Korean War finished in 1953. After the Korean War, the brigade imam from Turkish soldiers propagated Islam to local native Koreans. So these Muslim Turks, besides their duties to defend peace and freedom and propagate Islam, by which the first Korean Muslim generation opened new era for Islam in Korea. Now, according to the Korea Muslim Federation, Seoul registered Muslim organization, they say there are 16 mosques in Korea with about 6,000 local native Korean and 200,000 foreign Muslims at the present moment. Quite big number of local Muslims we have. Just you can see the first mosque in Korea, the central mosque in Itaewon. The picture is during the Eid al-Fitr after Ramadan. It's full of the Muslims, native and foreigners. Together, they celebrate the national and religious holidays. So we can the second mosque in Busan is second biggest city. Till now, we can see the historical relation for 1,200 years, the Arab and Korea, friendly and brotherly relations. In the final part, I'd like to mention my ideas. What is the future prospect for Korea-UAE relations? Now Korea-UAE relation was upgraded to a special strategic partnership with the visit of Korean President Moon Jae-in to United Arab Emirates in March 2018. President Moon emphasized that UAE was the first country in the Middle East to establish a special strategic partnership with Korea. The two countries will become true brothers that look into another next 100 years. This is pictures of the two presidents during the state visits. Economically, UAE became the largest market for Korea in the Middle East and the biggest overseas market for Korean construction companies. This country also ranked first in terms of people-to-people exchange in the region. This is very important. Our two countries of Korea and United Arab Emirates will further strengthen existing cooperation and expand it into realms of new technology and industries being pursued in response to the fourth industrial revolution era, including information, communication technology, together with green energy, national defense, medical services, the art, and other cultural issues. I'm personally very much impressed by the remarks of His Excellency Crown Prince saying, a special strategic partnership with Korea is now evolving into one of brotherly countries. As novel, generally we call the Muslim countries as brother. But as a non-Muslim countries, His Excellency described Korea as brotherly country. This is a pivotal and remarkable significance, the importance of mutual relation and further cooperation between Korea and United Arab Emirates. Of course, we have the many cases to represent the mutual relation and the brotherly collaboration between Korea and Arab Emirates. It's the most important things, as you know well, the Baraka nuclear project. The construction of Korea-made Baraka power plant is more than just the construction of nuclear power plant. It is a key project that brings the two countries' partnership forward over the next 100 years, and thus very symbolic and new horizontal. Second interesting the sample for the mutual collaboration is recently the rice field in the desert, the Korean rice, Korean technology. You see, another example touched deeply in my mind personally is to cultivate the rice in UAE rice field with agricultural cooperation between two countries. I have great expectation to eat the Korean rice in Dubai and Abu Dhabi very soon with you. Now, as a professor of cultural anthropology and cultural studies, I'd like to enlighten the importance of cultural understanding, which I believe shall be the strong infrastructure for more sustainable cooperation and continuation of real sense of friendship. So my humble proposal for further cooperation with the UAE are as followed. First, my personal idea and suggestion. For mutual understanding, I'd like to suggest designing Korea handbook for UAE youth and young peoples, and UAE handbook for Koreans as well. You see, to understand the culture, history, and people understanding, we should know the culture, way of life, or history exactly without any biased textbook by the West. So we write and design our own handbook to understand the friend exactly without any preoccupation. Second, joint research and efforts to eliminate Islamophobia in Korea. Islamophobia is unfortunately quite widespread in Korea, like other Western countries. To close the friendship and brotherhood in unnecessary Islamophobia is great obstacles. So my idea is how to eliminate this Islamophobia in Korea. Third, I suggest the joint research to revise school textbook of both countries, through which we can reach the more friendly description and contents on Islam and Arab in Korea, Korean culture and history in Arab world as well. So from the primary school, kindergarten, we should know each other based on accuracy and the reality and truth. In this sense, this is also very significant and remarkable initiation for the mutual understandings. The fourth, my humble suggestion is to establishment of Arab Islamic Cultural Center in Korea. We don't have any Arab Islamic Cultural Center. Reliable channel to introduce culture, language, art, and people of Arab world based on mutual respect and friendship. The fifth, to support of Arab Research Fund for Korean scholars and researchers to study on Arab Islamic history and civilization from Arab side on the one hand and from Korean side on the other hand, creating new scholarship and fellowship to Arab young scholars or PhD candidates in finding Korea-related material from Arabic manuscript in the libraries, institutions, museums of Arab countries. So this kind of the historical and archaeological humanistic approach also make two people more close, more understandable level, I believe. The sixth, to organize regular the humanity forum. Not temporary, not once. We need a regular exchange channel for dialogue among religions, for example, Islam, Christianity, and Buddhism, and different civilizations annually or biannually. Seventh, the Korea-Arab joint archaeological excavation works in the various sites of UAE. In archaeological, the academism is very high, widespread in Korean society. So many Korean archaeologists, very strong willingness to collaborate with the UAE partner scholars to joint research, joint excavation works in United Arab Emirates. Eighth, the holistic survey of 50 years of Korean labors in Middle East, economic, social, cultural conference between Korea and Arab world. As you know well, 1970s and 80s, more than 1 million Korean laborers had a deep-rooted experience in Arab world. To evaluate this kind of long experience and relation, then we can prepare new horizontal of another 50 or 100 years next prospects and cooperation. So this is the all I prepared to show you, to emphasizing the importance and remarkable the background between Korea and United Arab Emirates. Again, congratulations of the 40th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relation between brotherly country, Republic of Korea and United Arab Emirates, and hope the prosperity of mutual relation for another 100 years or another 1,000 years. Thank you very much. 감사합니다. 슈크란 저질란 마슬라마.